Welcome back to another episode of II Captain. I'm your co-host, Mark DeSantis. Today we'll talk about the integration and impact of AI and automation. It's an important topic you'll need to gain clarity on when developing or deploying AI assistants. We'll talk about things like the potential for AI to check its own work, the idea of using AI to complement human capabilities, and optimizing processes before automating. Let's get to it.
WWT presents II Captain.
I guess there's kind of two parts to thinking about starting to trust an AI assistant versus completely trusting it versus trust but verify. On the one hand, I think the adage is that we hold the AI assistant to a much higher bar than we do the people that we work with. We expect and understand that people make mistakes, but we don't allow or afford for that when, ironically, AI is modeled after the way that humans think.
Right.
So in that regard, I think it is interesting that we tend to say, well, we're not going to put an AI assistant into production because it may make mistakes. It's like, really? We have all these other places where we're right for them, but we deal with it. But so I guess there's an aspect of that I would say we should inspect and can helpfully inspect both on both fronts. Like, why do we allow for more mistakes in a particular space here and not here, and vice versa? So that would be a key component that I think we need to look at as a whole. I think the other thing, though, and it kind of goes back a little bit to the effects, being cognizant of the potential of adverse effects of some of these tools, because I see this today a lot, is attention to detail. I feel like, in the observations that I make, that people in general are paying less attention to detail than they have in the past. And so when you add assistants in a way, it's like, I'm going to give you an assistant, but you now need to up your attention to detail. It's a trade-off. And when we have so many distractions in the world, whether in the corporate environment, like Teams notifications, texts, et cetera, that kind of distracts us, and we're giving you an assistant to take off that work, it's a double-edged sword that we need to look at and kind of tackle there.
And I think about, I have a lot of thoughts there, I guess, but one of them would be GitHub Copilot, and kind of to our earlier conversation, if you are someone who is a professional programmer, you're going to understand, like, when GitHub Copilot is suggesting something that is not helpful.
Right.
So you're going to go through and, as you write your program or give it prompts, it's going to suggest things that, you're going to say, maybe this one's helpful, maybe this one's not. I think about, the human interactions, whether it's with quoting or with support cases, and the responses that the AI generates back. So we can use, like, maybe the first thing that we can try if we really want to automate those responses is using what's called reflection, right? So using the AI to check itself, right? And you're getting a lot of efficiency out of that in terms of the accuracy of the results. And so one example is I can ask an AI to write a program, and then I can take that program, feed it back through the same AI, and say, identify the bugs in this program, right, and it'll identify the bugs, right? So why didn't it fix those bugs to begin with? I don't think we truly understand it.
But it models the way we do it too. So,
right,
yeah.
Exactly. But as you iterate back through the AI, it's going to get more accurate. So that's one thing that we can do to, get to a point where maybe we're more trusting of the automation. But when we talk about, humans and kind of our own inerrancies and our tendency to not be super detail oriented, like, I think there are ways of giving people, their own kind of assistive, techniques using AI, right? And so if it is, double checking, the output of an RFP or a quote, or, the response coming back, for a support case, I think there are ways of going through, and we were kind of trying to do some of this with the contract assistant, right? Going through and using the AI to classify, bits of the response to say which of these are riskiest, and maybe not just expecting the human to, kind of read through the whole thing and kind of like nitpick every detail, but maybe using AI to point the human to the areas that they need to
like an intelligent
inspect.
checklist, kind of.
Yeah,
like, hey,
yeah.
That makes sense. I guess the other thing with what you said with GitHub Copilot as an example, your work product is at the end. You're using you intrinsically are using the assistant to produce that. Like you said, you'll know if it's bad or good based on when you compile it and does it run, does it pass the test, etc. The other spaces, maybe taking a look at those and saying, is there something you do, whether gamification or measuring, that says, your individual accuracy on responding to order statuses is X%, and using the assistant can get you there. But if you blindly use it, your percentage of accuracy may go down.
And it's no different than what developers have been doing for, at least a decade now. Like, there's analysis that happens on the code, right? And, whether it's human analysis that happens in a pull request, or after the pull request, or maybe even before the pull request is merged, ideally, there are, different analysis tools that run, right? SonarQube is one that, we've been using here, and it can go through and identify risks, areas within your code where maybe it's not following best practices, or, this is something that looks like it's maybe more complex than it should be. And just to highlight things that now another developer can go in and review and fix. We have tools like that for security, making sure that our code is following security practices. And so, thinking about, kind of the outputs that people have, if it's a Word document or a PDF or even a PowerPoint presentation, I think, Microsoft is trying to do some of this with Copilot, right? So you'll notice this in your emails, right? As you start to write an email, it'll chime in, right? And say, this email seems a little bit dry to me, or this email seems like you're talking about a very serious topic, but maybe you're taking it in a direction that is, not straight to the point, right? And so I think that's where a lot of this is headed, is, kind of using AI to augment humans, kind of draw their attention to the areas that they should be, more focused on. Spell check has been there, for 20 something years, and it kind of does the same thing.
I like how you set the time span of a decade so that I couldn't have any say in the practice of coding. Since it was last time I really did that was a while ago.
Yeah,
so
I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. Pre-Java.
So,
Yeah.
But grammar check, spell check, same kind of idea, right? That's always been there in, for maybe 20 years or so in Microsoft Word, where it's like, here are the areas that you need to go back and review. And I think AI is basically giving us just a more advanced version of that.
Yeah. Well, though I ran into the hall with this morning with somebody talking about their using AI in their emails, and how it was continually saying that they were direct, maybe too direct, et cetera. It's kind of like, are we going to all end up sounding the same? Or sometimes directness can be good.
That's fair.
Back to the point of like being informed. I think that's good. Back to reflection, as you kind of put it. Of at least now I have somebody telling me ahead of time, you're sounding like a jerk.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I intended to be. Or no, maybe I should soften that up.
Yeah, I found myself like questioning my own like intentions sometimes. Like, is this what I'm intending to do as I write this email?
Paralyzed with fear writing an email,
Right. Yeah, but it is a good check, right? Because we have, we're a culture here of like open and honest feedback. And, I would benefit over my career here if I had an AI pointing out the areas where, maybe I was being a little bit too harsh with my words,
right?
And giving me the opportunity to kind of second, guess myself a little bit.
My favorite was early days. I get a lot of emails asking for approval for things, and I hit the generate the response, and it was like a paragraph of flowery language with, I just deleted all. I just put approved and sent it. At that point, it's like they're not really looking for a greeting.
Exactly.
How are you feeling today? It was just like, I just want to know if this is approved or not.
Yeah. I would say, so we talk about, some of the things that scare us about AI. Like, so for me, I might point to the hype.
Yeah.
Right now as being one of the scariest things.
To cut through.
Yeah. Because there's the reality of what AI can do, and then there's the hype of what it could do.
Yeah.
And, I think there's a lot of high expectations out there that will eventually, I think be addressed, but I don't think all of them will be addressed right now.
Right.
And so there is a, an education process that's necessary for everybody to understand, like, what can we do today? We've talked a lot about the assistant mindset, and that being necessary. So what can we do today versus what might we be able to do a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road?
Right. Remind me, I don't remember where the quote came from, but it's definitely not me, but I liked it. It was, we often overestimate the impact of something in the short term, but underestimate it in the long term, which is, I think, what's driving a lot of our activity is trying to figure out how to navigate and hit the right mark in the middle. But back to your point of the hype generates things. So for me, the fear is actually along those lines, that there's so much hype and so much we need to use this particular technology that the conversations that we have are more about what we can do with that versus what we talked about earlier. What are the business outcomes, and then how can we unfettered start to tackle them? Again, we had a case where the business in a particular space came and said, we want to automate this particular thing. But then in the course of the conversation of unpacking it, it was, well, how many of you think that this process is actually the best process? And no one raised their hands. Like, so why are we automating a bad process versus actually first going back, optimizing the process, and then automating it? And I think that's where, in the course of all of our other conversations, the opportunities become even more available for us to say, well, now that I've optimized this, I can see where I might be able to intersperse some AI, some low code, maybe it's a SaaS, across the gamut. And now we're starting to build a solid foundation as opposed to rushing to, build the best chatbot, but it's a shaky foundation. And then we're, later having a bunch of tech debt and things that we're spending more time on this than on the part that actually matters, which is running an efficient and effective business.
And to me, it all comes down to like having engaged teams, right? And I really love the model where the teams, like the delivery teams, are engaged directly with the stakeholders because they can ask them those direct questions of like, what is the intention here? So we had an example where we were told we need to use AI for our website. Find a way to use AI for the website. And the idea was around recommendations, recommending content to users. And so we knew we weren't going to, and this was probably 3 years ago. So before generative AI, was abounding. But we knew it wasn't something we were going to be able to build from scratch, right? We didn't have that skill set. And so we went out and worked with a vendor, so an existing vendor that we had, and they had just hired somebody who was, kind of a key developer behind YouTube's algorithm for recommendations. So they had a recommendations product, and it's like, all right, sounds great. Let's do a POC. So we, spent $10,000 to do a POC with them, because in this case, AI isn't free, right? There's a lot of compute that's behind these engines. And so we set the engine up. We basically passed our top 5,000 users into the system, and we did some analysis, and we figured out how different were the recommendations coming back for those top 5,000 users. So we took the top 10 recommendations for each of those users and calculated the uniqueness of those recommendations across the users, and 98% matched.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so when we talk about recommendations, we're ultimately getting at a personalized experience.
Right.
If 98% of the recommendations coming back are matching, that's not a personalized experience. As we dug into it, with the vendor, it came down to, we don't have enough content, we don't have enough traffic, right? So when you think about something like YouTube, where you have millions of users and millions of pieces of content, the algorithms work in different ways than if you have, maybe a couple of thousand pieces of content and maybe a few thousand users.
Right.
And so in our case, with an engaged group of, developers, we were able to quickly pivot away and say, okay, if the intention here is personalized recommendations, we have a lot of the data. We're tracking, what types of content people are accessing. We use a tag-based system within our website today. So each content is tagged, so it might be networking or SD-WAN or even Cisco, highlighting some of our OEMs out there. And so if you're visiting that content, we can now start to infer that like you're probably going to want to see more Cisco content, right? Or more SD-WAN content. And so what we did is using the tools that we already had, like with our Lucene index, figured out, okay, we have the ability to weight certain pieces of content higher based on the tags that you're visiting. And so within about 3 days, we built a solution that we're still using today. And while it's not technically AI, it solves the problem, right? It gives you a personalized set of recommendations.
That's a good example. So. Yeah. I think that the case that we see often enough, regardless, it's just it's a human tendency. You see something cool, and you start to think, how can I use that in a particular way? And that drives a lot of the initial conversations and friction between business and IT. So generative AI being the thing that today, the hype cycle is there. Right?
Yeah.
You know, every day I get an email of new technology. You know, the VC that's going into it. So that's just generally the one that we're seeing the most. But yeah, I think we tend to have, back to you said, we have a high trust and an ability in our culture to be direct in a respectful way of like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Is spending that money on this type of thing really going to solve that problem? But let's also unpack the integrations that we will have to do, the long-term support, and all those things. And 9 times out of 10, you know, we'll expend an appropriate amount of effort there too, not just dismiss things out of hand, but to engage on a mutually respectful conversation around what is it, and does that rise to the level of it beats out all the other things that we're talking about? Because we're talking about these business problems every day across the board, across all of our lines of business. So it's not that we have a shortage of problems to solve. It's more like how are we making sure that we're solving the right problems at the right time with the right technology,
Exactly,
and with the right change management so they're adopted. Otherwise, we're just building stuff that is cool but not
exactly.
Not
and
helpful.
you know, I think about a planning meeting we had for our event planner, you know, system rewrite, and a lot of the features we talked about, you know, maybe a quarter of them were things that we wouldn't be able to really talk about doing without generative AI, right? So things like creating an agenda based on, you know, a loose outline in an email, right? That's not something that you really can do without, you know, an LLM. And so the LLM definitely enables us to talk about problems differently. But yeah, it shouldn't, the conversation shouldn't start with how do we use an LLM? Right? It should start with what problems, what user experiences are we trying to provide and solve? And then, figure out how does an LLM, you know, enable us where, you know, it can, but also where does traditional automation and, you know, programming experience come into play. That's a wrap on this episode of II Captain. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to check out our next couple of episodes, which will touch on 2 of the more exciting AI projects we're building within WWT. A chatbot we call Adam, and a tool we called RFP Assistant that helps streamline the request for proposals process. These tools are adding tremendous value for our internal teams and will give you a behind-the-scenes look at how we're making it happen. See you next time.